Good afternoon and welcome to the launch of New Crossings, Caribbean Migration Narratives by Anthea Morrison. We are streaming live on YouTube, and this event is hosted by the Department of Literatures and English at UWI-Mona in collaboration with the University of the West Indies Press, also headquartered at UWI-Mona. My name is Rachelle Mosley Wood, and I'm going to chair the event this afternoon. I'm happy and I'm really delighted to be part of this event and to be able to sit here with you this afternoon and participate in this launch. It's not only because the author of the book that we're launching, Anthea Morrison, is a dear friend and former colleague, and because I think that I can say that I've witnessed a little of her journey towards publication. But it's also because this launch has been a long time in coming, and I'm just happy that we finally reached this point. Anthea's book, New Crossings, was published late in 2019, and we were prepared to do the launch in 2020. But we all know what happened in 2020. We don't need to say. So we've finally been able to get to the point where we can do the launch, and I'm really very happy and pleased about that, and wish Anthea congratulations on this very important achievement. Some of you listening may not know a lot about Anthea, so let me just tell you a little about who she is. She's a retired senior lecturer in comparative Caribbean literature from the Department of Literatures and English at UWI-Mona. Prior to joining the staff at Mona, she lectured in francophone literature at the Cave Hill campus of the UWI from 1986 to 2004, and prior to that, she worked as a translator. She has not only given sterling service to this university as an academic, but also as an administrator. And she was Deputy Dean for Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Humanities and Education. She was Deputy Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Dean of Graduate Studies from 2016 to 2018, and Deputy Dean for Undergraduate Studies from 2013 to 2015. She's also a former head of the Department of Literatures in English, and served in that position from 2006 to 2009. Her research interests include Caribbean poetry, migrant literature, and Caribbean/African American women's writing. She has published articles on post-negritude Francophone Caribbean poetry, Caribbean/African American women's writing, and Caribbean diasporic literature, and has co-edited with Judith Byfield and Larry Denzer, Gendering the African Diaspora, Women, Culture, and Historical Change in the Caribbean and the Nigerian Hinterland. She's currently working on a monograph on the poetry of Lorna Goodison. So Anthea has retired, but she is still going at it and being a productive member of the Academy. And we are launching her first book, and we look forward to another. We have an exciting program planned for you. In addition to the usual kinds of presentations you would expect with a book launch, we also will follow with a panel discussion on the topic, A Conversation on Migration. And just so that you will stay tuned and remain online for that conversation and discussion, just to let you know that participating in that panel discussion will be Dr. Norval Edwards, Professor Paulette Ramsey, and Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown. And we hope that one of the things that panel discussion will achieve is just to demonstrate how literature and literary analysis and criticism can really function as a springboard for so many other different concerns with issues in the real world. We may be writing about fiction, but there is this close connection with bread and butter and everyday issues that people face. Okay, so we have quite a long program ahead of us, so let's get started. And I'm happy to invite the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Professor Wabinte Wareboko, to bring greetings. Okay, thank you. I'm back with you. Let me just continue to acknowledge some of the people that we have in the audience. Members of the UWI Press Board, members of UWI Press Management and Staff, the UWI Mona Librarian, the National Library of Jamaica representative, and from the Jamaica Library Service, Miss Maureen Thompson and Miss Candice Leverage and Dion Barnett. Remember that you can order a copy of New Crossings online. You can visit www.uwipress.com to purchase copies, and UWI Press has a special offer. They're giving you a 50% discount on the book, but that special offer expires on Sunday, February 28th. If you miss that 50% discount, you can enjoy a 30% discount until March 31. Details of this special offer are listed on the UWI Press website. And remember that conditions apply, but you can go to the press and check out all of that information. And that is www.uwipress.com. Okay, I think we are ready for for the greetings now from Professor Wabinte Wareboko.
Faculty of Humanities and Education. On behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, I very heartily congratulate my colleague and friend, Dr. Anthea Morrison, on the publication of New Crossings, Caribbean Migration Narratives. I also wish to heartily welcome all those who have responded to the invitation from the Department of Literatures in English and the University of the West Indies Press to celebrate the formal announcement of this publication. Dr. Morrison gave selfless and worthy stewardship to the Faculty of Humanities and Education in various capacities. As head of the Department of Literatures in English, as head of the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, and as Deputy Dean for Undergraduate and Postgraduate Studies at different times. Dr. Morrison retired recently as one of our most esteemed colleagues in the Faculty of Humanities and Education. It is therefore with great delight that I participate in this online ceremony aimed at celebrating Dr. Morrison's scholastic contribution to the study of Caribbean migration stories and their meanings for individuals as well as communities. Migration behavior as a subject of intellectual investigation cuts across disciplinary boundaries such as cultural studies, philosophy, psychology, literature, history, sociology, and economics. New Crossings, in a sense, is contributing to this complex and multidisciplinary subject that has attracted the attention of eminent Caribbean scholars such as late Professor Caryl Brathwaite, whose poems on migration have been cited by Elizabeth Thomas Hope, another eminent scholar on Caribbean migration. With the publication of New Crossings, Dr. Morrison has taken a pride of place in the growing pantheon of distinguished scholars interested in Caribbean migrations. Migration stories reflect a coming together of a myriad of personal images, beliefs, and values shared by others of the same social group. These images, beliefs, and values constitute a reflection of the meaning of that person's microenvironment and the nature of that person's psychological life space. For these and other reasons, migration narratives also constitute a veritable source material for understanding how migrants, once abroad, deal with issues of individual and group identity constructions in their final chosen destinations. Within these interrelated perspectives and contexts, New Crossings will contribute to our understanding of the global, national, and local factors that are always interacting and reinforcing to form the environmental and ideological frameworks within which people make decisions to cross and crisscross international state boundaries. With this in mind, let me close by once again saluting Dr. Morrison for not letting the administrative duties I earlier referred to prevent the writing and publication of this fascinating book. Well done, my friend, Dr. Morrison. Well done. The Faculty of Humanities and Education is very proud of you.
Thank you, Professor Wariboko, for those kind words of support and encouragement. And can I say that as a former colleague of Anthea's in the Department of Literatures and English, that I've always admired how she has juggled all of these many responsibilities and done it with such great good grace. And I'm sure that if you could see Anthea now, you know, she's very uncomfortable when people praise her in public, but she's gonna have to endure it today. Can I now invite Dr. Joseph Powell, General Manager of the University of the West Indies Press, which published the book and which does such excellent work, publishing the work of UWI academics and others and bringing these unique and important perspectives on the Caribbean to the wider public. Dr. Joseph Powell.
Hello? Can I hear them? Oh, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always such a joy to spend an afternoon with you folks. I guess it's part of why I love my job, to be around such amazing people, one of which we honor and discuss today, the author of this book. Nobody's really shown it yet, but New Crossings. And that's a heck of a deal that we're offering. I need to talk to the person making that sale because I didn't approve that. No, I'm just kidding. This is a tremendous buy, but it's an awesome book. I'm not a student of migration per se, but I was first exposed in the 90s to migration in my class. And yeah, you guessed it, we studied the Caribbean migration. Unfortunately, at the time, there wasn't such a wonderful book to draw from. But I'll tell you, right now, I would choose it for my class, and it's just an amazing, and it's put together so well as a book. At first, you think you're looking at an edited volume, but that obviously can't be. And as a single authored book, it's well put together. You know, you've got a section in front. The introduction is amazing, but you'll hear more about that from the other panelists. But we really enjoy working on it, and I enjoy working with Anthea. I wish you were here more. We could hang out, or if you are here, we should hang out more often. What can I say? Is this? I'd be repeating the Dean and Professor Wood that this is. You should buy it. You should read it. It's an amazing book if you have even the slightest interest in migration, as I did. Well, I actually kept studying migration as a student and almost sort of majored in it within sociology. So I feel at home and comfortable today with you guys. And I think that's all I can say. I want to thank the press as always, hardworking people that somehow get the job done despite many, many obstacles. That would be Janelle and Kaylee both, and the entire staff here at the UE Press. Okay, we should move along so that we can hear from the author. But it's been good spending a little time with you guys. Hopefully we can chat at the end, perhaps. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Powell. And yes, I do hope we get to chat at the end. We will now have a review of New Crossings, and this will be given by Dr. Hilary Robertson Hinklin. Dr. Robertson Hinklin is a former senior lecturer, now retired from the Behavioral Science and General Management Unit at the Mona School of Business and Management at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Specializing in diaspora and migration studies, she has written the book, White Squall on the Land, Narratives of Resilient Caribbean People. This was first published by Caryl Press and then was published as an ebook by Hope Road Publishers, London. Dr. Robertson Hinklin is also the author of That Time in Foreign, also published by Hansip, London. She has worked as a management consultant in the public and private sectors and a psychologist in Jamaica, the UK, and New Zealand. And she has become increasingly interested in return migration to Africa. Dr. Robertson Hicklin.
Okay, it's a tremendous pleasure to provide this review of New Crossings, Caribbean Migration Narratives by Anthea Morrison. This book was 10 years in the making, and it was worth every minute because it allowed Anthea Morrison's clear, lucid, brilliant mind to intersect and interrogate some of the complexities of Caribbean migration. What do we mean by that? One of the concepts that she looks at is the duality of allegiance, meaning the homeland versus, or in addition to the host land. And so she chose 5 authors whose work would represent the English-speaking, French-speaking, and Spanish-speaking. And of course, we know that her trilingualism has been very helpful in terms of helping us to understand the issues. And so the first person who she looked at was that Edwidge Danticat, Haitian-born, taken to the United States as a child, like 2 of our other writers, Junot Díaz and Caryl Phillips, and taken at a time and in a way in which her Haitianness and her Americanness are able to interact and intersect. And she, in fact, has written a book called Creating Dangerously. And she has, in fact, produced many, many books about this experience of being a Haitian and being an American. In addition, we're looking at the work of Junot Díaz, who is from the Dominican Republic. Now, both of these people come from a mainland which has 2 countries. One should never think, however, that in spite of the alliances they have, that they are coming from the same place. Because there has been a history of contradictions, which include things like Haitians who are born in the Dominican Republic have lost their citizenship because of legal constraints. And so, interestingly enough, Junot and Edwidge have done quite a lot of work in the American mainland. And so the issue of diasporas then becomes a very important one. And I want to say that while we're looking at the 2 people, we are recognizing that unlike Edwidge, Junot Díaz does not see himself, quote unquote, as a real Dominican. Now, one of the interesting things about this seeming contradiction is not only has he written sometimes sexually explicit things, but he talks very carefully and clearly about the impact of the Trujillo regime on life in the Dominican Republic, resulting in people taking flight to the United States. Edwidge Danticat, of course, has spoken about that history of Haiti, the first free republic and so on, in which we have had the interference of first the French, then the Americans, the installment of various dictators, and the ongoing poverty and suffering of the Haitian people, but also their resilience. So a lot of their work is written about life in the diasporas. So Junot and Edwidge have done things together, and in fact, both have been criticized because of the way in which they've worked together in the US, which has, of course, its own challenges. Now, of course, the book that Junot Díaz is most famous for is The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And I was astonished as a person growing up and living in Jamaica of the impact of this Trujillo regime. Now, Caryl Phillips was the 3rd person who had been taken to Britain in this case as a child, as an infant from St. Kitts. And he has a different take on his relationship to his quote-unquote homeland. He moved to England, where he remained until he was a young adult. And then he moved on to the United States after that. So he has operated in quite different ways. And I think for me, his work is more difficult to really understand. So unlike Danticat, who theorized about the condition of diasporic subjects, he has taken a different kind of view, more complex and less colored with emotion. Then we come to Maryse Condé, who has had who is the oldest of the writers, and she was born in Guadeloupe, and then she has been to Africa. She's lived in France. She's lived in the United States, and in fact, one of her books is called "To Africa Again." So she has had audacious journeys to strange lands and to imagine elusive homelands. And one of the things that we recognize about Maryse Condé, who is a prodigious voyager, she's never fully a nomad, but she's never definitely rooted. So she has created a number of very interesting protagonists, mainly but not exclusively female, who move from the Antilles, from where they are born, to Africa, to North America, to Europe. And in fact, some of these protagonists reflect her own life experience. And so part of the thing that we do look about with her is our acceptance of the issue of impermanence. Questions everybody asks: where do I belong? Where do I fit in? Can I live in two places? Do I belong in one? And finally, Curdella, Forbes, who is Jamaican born, who went to the United States as an adult and an academic. And she looks at a kind of stage migration, rural to urban, urban to rural, before going overseas. She often uses the metaphor of the soil, the land, planting, and so on. And of course, when her protagonist is about to leave to go overseas, which he has not fully told his partner about, she then recognizes that when he goes away, he begins to feel the loss of the land. So the issue of Caribbean identity is one of the ones that Curdella Forbes looks at. So when the protagonist is abroad, he's yearning for home. Now, what does all of that say? As I said at the beginning, in the current context where migration is a big theme, where we have tremendous economic and social dislocation, this is a perfect time to look at some of these issues. We recognize that Caribbean migrants, the ones featured here, are not exiles, but people for whom or who have made a choice to be a migrant. So their experience is not monolithic, and that is so because there are variations in terms of their own personal choices, the situation in terms of the geopolitics of where they have come from, and other kinds of factors which have been important. So, as I began, I can say the book is written well, thoroughly well researched, able to see the nuance of the francophone, anglophone, and hispanophone countries as a result of Anthea Morrison's knowledge of the languages. And the book, as I said, has taken 10 years to write, and every page is worth it. It is an important contribution to the literature and provides an excellent way of looking at ourselves. It's a great mirror to hold up, to recognize it is not monolithic. Our experience is not monolithic, and that is much more nuanced than we think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hilary Robertson Hicklin, for that very insightful review of New Crossings. You gave so much information, piqued our interest, very insightful and informative, but still left spaces that encourage the reader to buy the book and explore it and read it for themselves. Thank you, Hilary. We now come to the big moment. The big moment when we will hear the author herself speak about the book and tell us a little about the journey that she experienced to publication. I've already told you about Anthea and about her service to the department, to the university, and her accomplishments, a little of her accomplishments as an academic. So I will not elaborate further, but will simply invite her to come now and give her response. Anthea Morrison.
Hi, good afternoon. Professor Warwick Booker, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Dr. Rachel Mosley-Wood, Head of Literatures in English, colleagues, friends, students, all those who have taken the time to join us today. Good afternoon, and I am so happy to see you all virtually somewhat. And I would love to simply say, I'm speechless. I wish I could stop there, but perhaps that will not be enough, will not be allowed. So let me say that my heart is full of gratitude that I will try to put quickly into words. First of all, many thanks to Professor Warwick Booker for his warm and kind words of greeting and support. I have been so fortunate to work with him. I so appreciate his presence today, as well as the leadership and the friendship that he offered during my time in the faculty. Thanks, Prof. And then on to Dr. Robertson-Hicklin. I'm so grateful for the generous review of the book. I must say, I'm not sure I recognize myself as author. And I do want, though, to tell you that I appreciate all the time you took, your care, your generosity, your eloquence. Thank you, thank you. And then to Dr. Joseph Powell, a busy publisher who nevertheless found the time to be with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Powell, and for your kind words about the book. Let me thank the whole team at UE Press. I really must single out Siobhan Hearn, who is an amazing and a patient, very patient editor. Thanks to the rest of the UWI Press team who have done so much to organize this evening's launch. And I must mention Kelly Williams, hardworking Kelly, and Ajanel Solomon, who's in charge of the IT aspects. All of UE Press, all of the UWI Press have facilitated me whenever possible. But how do I express my appreciation to Dr. Rachel, as some of us call her, or Dr. Mosley-Wood, and her department? I used to be able to say my department. This is a challenging time, we all know. It has tested our resources, both material and psychological. And the department head has a lot on her plate, more than ever. As she hinted earlier on, the book had come out. It actually came out more than a year ago. And then it arrived in Jamaica just before the COVID crisis. So as Rachel would ask me from time to time, when we're going to launch your book, and I would say there was absolutely no rush given what we were going through collectively. But time passed and she insisted, and so here we are today. So I thank her most warmly for her hard work, for her friendship, and for the very helpful discussions we had pre-publication. And I should mention that her own text, a groundbreaking analysis of Jamaican cinema, was published over a year ago and was launched, I think, in March last year, the title being Show Us As We Are. Thanks to all my colleagues in the department, truly a nurturing space. And in particular, to the creative and hardworking Whitney Eaton, to Venice Gordon Francis, and to Antoinette Jackson. And though they have not yet spoken, my appreciation goes to the three colleagues, each of whom is a specialist in his or her own field, who accepted our invitation to participate in a panel discussion on migration. And I'm thinking, of course, of Claudette Crawford Brown, of Nadia Edwards, and of Paulette Ramsey. Writing this book has been a long project. I'm not sure, Rachel, that I'm going to say that much about what motivated me now, except that I've always had in the back of my mind a famous pronouncement by the Aimé Césaire, the Martinican poet, who spoke of transplanted peoples of the diaspora, of his own Martinicans, as follows. He described them as ceux qui n'ont connu de voyage que de déracinement, those whose journeys have all been uprootings. And so probably because I began in francophone literature, this line sort of haunted me, thinking of other journeys, new crossings. And I know that as Caribbean people, we all have someone somewhere in foreign. In my case, and I don't really have any close family in foreign, my father was born in Panama and came back home when he was about 3. So I think there are many reasons why the topic seemed to me to be potent, since we are a people of journeyers. So it was a long project, but honestly, I couldn't have made it to this point without the interest, the insights, and the simple camaraderie of so many friends and colleagues whose encouragement has meant much to me over the years. It's hard to name names, but I crave your indulgence while I mention just a few in alphabetical order. Nadia Edwards, Lorna Goodison, Mary Gray, Michelle Kennedy, Evelyn O'Callaghan, Velma Pollard, Tracy Robinson, Swithin Wilmot, and there are many others I can't name. I would love to hail up my Barbados posse, though, some of my great friends from the Cave Hill days. Evelyn O'Callaghan is a part of that group too, but I want to refer now to Cherry Brady Clark, to Denise Haynes, to Terence Innes, friends who have believed in me for a long time. And I need to acknowledge my students. Here I absolutely cannot name names. And these are mainly past students now, both graduate and undergraduate. They're stimulating questions. For example, in a course that Nadia Edwards and I co-taught called Narratives of Migration, their stimulating questions and their comments have kept me thinking, if not necessarily on my toes. And finally, my gratitude goes to my family, without whom I would be nothing. Special thanks, first of all, to my precious mother, who has surrounded her children with so much love and support and encouragement over the years. To my wonderful son, Tariq, who always cheers me on. To my sister, Petey, my dear almost twin. And to my brother, Dennis, dear ally, always a large shoulder to lean on. And so finally, to all of you, the audience, I'm so grateful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. And I think that's the end of the author's speech.
Thank you, Anthea, for that heartfelt response. I know you're feeling it deep inside, and I'm smiling because I mean it is just a wonderful achievement, and I congratulate you on the publication of this book. And
thank you so much, Miss Rachel. Big you up. Let me big you up, and thank you.
Well, I say I don't know which other author at the launch of their own book would take time to speak about the book of somebody else. So thank you, Anthea.
Thank you.
Okay, we move on now to the second part of the event. Before I introduce the panelists and bring them into the discussion, just let me remind you that you can order New Crossings online by going to the UWI Press website, which is www.uwipress.com. And right now they're having a special offer. You can get copies of the book at a 50% discount, but that offer expires on February 28th. And thereafter, there's a 30% discount on the book until March 31st. Go to the website and you will see full details. And I haven't said it yet. I guess you talk about your own last, but let me just say a special welcome and hello to members of the Department of Literatures in English who are joining us online. I know that they really would like to be able to express their congratulations, to convey congratulations to Anthea on this remarkable achievement. So hi guys. Okay, so it's time to move now to the panel discussion under the title, A Conversation on Migration. And on this panel, we have Dr. Norval Edwards, Dr. Norval Edwards, who is Senior Lecturer in the Department of Literatures in English, and you will probably hear me refer to him as Nadi. Professor Paulette A. Ramsey, who is Professor of Afro-Hispanic Studies in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, and Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown, former Senior Lecturer in the Department of Sociology, let me try and get this right, Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. I'm gonna introduce Dr. Edwards, just say a little more about who he is, and then, okay, so I see Dr. Ramsey is up on the screen. Well, let me go to Dr. Ramsey and introduce her, and then we'll go to Dr. Edwards and then Dr. Crawford Brown.
I'm not there.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I understand that it is indeed Dr. Edwards who is on the screen. So Dr. Norval Edwards is a senior lecturer and departmental coordinator for graduate studies in the Department of Literatures in English at the UWI Mona campus, Jamaica. He has published numerous articles on Caribbean literature and criticism, travel writing, and popular culture. His research interests include Caribbean literary and cultural studies, post-colonial literatures and theories, and African diaspora studies. Its current research projects include Caribbean literary cartographies, anglophone Caribbean poetics, and post-colonial historical metafiction. As I said before, you may hear me refer to him as Nadi. That's how he is affectionately known in the department. And he's also our resident expert on West Indian literature. Hi, Nadi. Can I ask you, in the introduction of New Crossings, Anthea Morrison states that, quote, the potent charge of home, remembered, imagined from abroad, is hardly a new preoccupation in Caribbean literature. Can you say a little about how earlier Caribbean literature and even more contemporary Caribbean literature has treated with this concern? That is migration. How preoccupied has Caribbean literature been with issues concerning migration?
Thank you, Rachel, for that question. And if I may, let me just thank Anthea for inviting me to be, or asking you to invite me to be a member of this panel. And I also want to congratulate Anthea for producing such an elegantly written and insightfully conceptualized book about the representation of migration in contemporary Caribbean literature. To return to your question, the issue of migration has been central, I think, to the very definition of West Indian literature. If we take George Lamming's comment in The Pleasures of Exile, where he states that West Indian literature is in many ways a kind of imaginative history of the Caribbean, and an imaginative history which, for the first time, allows Caribbean history to be articulated from the inside rather than from the outside. The fact that the history of this region has been constituted by multiple migrations, multiple diasporas, multiple linguistic and cultural encounters, within, of course, particular social, political, and historical contexts. It serves, therefore, to reason that migration will be a central thematic concern in the literature of the region. I'm going to speak primarily to anglophone Caribbean literature. I might make the occasional foray into talking about Hispanic and francophone Caribbean literatures, but I know Professor Ramsey will cover those areas. So I'll confine my remarks primarily to the anglophone Caribbean. And I'm going to begin with a statement made by Camo Brathwaite, the late, great Camo Brathwaite, in a 1957 essay, which looks at the theme of migration in Caribbean fiction of the 1950s, that post-Windrush moment of the 1950s, where so many West Indian writers were centered in London. And Camo Brathwaite in this essay looks at the issue of migrancy. And this is a statement that he makes. He says, "I want to submit that the desire, even the need to migrate, is at the heart of West Indian sensibility, whether that migration is in fact or by metaphor." And Brathwaite's comment is something which has, for me, a powerful conceptual and theoretical weight. When we think about the emergence of 20th century Caribbean literature, I say 20th century because I'm going to focus primarily on these texts, we see issues of migration, whether internal migration, as in the case of H.G. Delisle's 1913, 1914 novel, Jane's Career, where the protagonist journeys from rural Jamaica to Kingston, the capital. Or we look at issues of reverse migration, as in Claude McKay's Banana Bottom, published in the 1930s, where Beta Plant returns from England, having acquired a sophisticated English education. She moves back to her village and chooses to be linked to the farmer Juban, and where migration becomes a factor of what I'd call massive psychic dislocation, as in the case of Jean Rhys's 1934 Voyage in the Dark. So we see that even in the first 3 decades of the 20th century, we see a preoccupation with migration, and with novels which use migration as a point of departure for exploring all of these concerns, which Anthea Morrison takes on in her book, in the book that we are looking at today. New Caribbean Crossings. The concern with issues of home and identity, with issues of belonging. And these concerns, which emerge in the 1930s, are channeled into what I will call a particular conceptual paradigm for thinking about West Indian literature in the 1950s. And that conceptual paradigm is what I'll call the exilic paradigm, the paradigm of exile. And I'm using George Lamming's The Pleasures of Exile as the basic text here, because it is in that text that Lamming makes a statement that the condition of being a colonial is linked ineradicably to the condition of exile. And to be a colonial is to be an exile. And the colonial condition therefore produces these kinds of cultural and psychological marginalization, which Lamming categorizes under the umbrella term exile. I will stop here so that others can contribute, and then in the ensuing discussion, I will talk about later iterations of the themes of exile, migration, and diaspora.
Thank you, Nadi. Thank you for that contribution. And yes, as we move forward, we can also come back for you to say more on the literature of the Caribbean and its involvement with issues of migration. I'm going to move now to Professor Paulette Ramsey. And just to introduce her before we pose a question for her, Professor Ramsey is Professor of Afro-Hispanic Studies in the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona. She is an interdisciplinary academic, an established writer and researcher whose interests include language pedagogy, writing theories, and Afro-Hispanic literature and culture. Her research draws on broad post-colonial stroke postmodernist theories, gender studies, feminist studies, and cultural studies, as well as diaspora studies, and diaspora studies, especially as they relate to issues of identity, ethnicity, and nationhood. Professor Ramsey's reputation as one of the leading researchers in the area of Afro-Mexican literary and cultural production was sealed with the publication of her book, Afro-Mexican Constructions of Diaspora, Gender, Identity, and Nation in 2016. Professor Ramsey is also a creative writer and has written the very popular and critically well-received Aunt Jen novel, the novel Aunt Jen, and has also published 3 anthologies of poems. Professor Ramsey, migration and migration issues are fundamental. They're fundamental concerns in your own work and research. Can you say something about how migration has impacted and affected literary and cultural production from the point of view of your own research in this area?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mosley Wood. I want to begin. I'll come back to a more specific response, but I want to begin by pointing to what I've always said is the starting point, that that nub of the literature produced by Black persons of West Indian descent in Central America and different parts of Latin America. I want to begin by reading an email that I recently received. Hello, my name is Patricia Bastian Galleta, and I have been trying to research some information on my grandfather. He was a Jamaican that went to Ecuador to build the railroad. His name was William Deere. Not sure if he spelt it D-Y-E-R or D-I-E-R or D-E-I-R. He did marry an Ecuadorian woman, my grandmother, and they had 7 children. My mother was one of them. Can you please let me know if there are any archives or websites that I can go to see if I can get any information? In 2016, I published research on the migration of Jamaicans to Ecuador to build the railway line in that country. This was a journey that gave birth to the well-known folk song, Solomon Grandpa Gonna Ecuador, left him wife and picnic out a door. Since then, I have received at least 2 emails every year from persons who are Jamaicans, who are of Jamaican descent in Ecuador, wanting to make that connection with relatives. It is a quest to complete the puzzle of who I am, who I really am. The connection with someone such as Patricia came about because of one of these novels that I study, one of the Afro-Hispanic writers, a writer named Chiriboga, Luz Argentina Chiriboga, and one of her novels dealt with this important issue of Jamaican migration to Ecuador. So I'm getting to a little more specificity in answering you now that many of these novels produced by Black writers in Latin America and Central America deal with the migration of their forefathers to the country of their birth. They are not able to write about the migration experience back to the homeland. Much of their travel, their journey to the homeland happens in the mind because they process the memories that have been shared with them by their grandparents, great-grandparents, and they take that journey in their minds. Well, let me make the connection now with the email to Dr. Morrison's book. The email underlines all the reasons Dr. Morrison's book is so important. Ecuador, of course, was one of the many places to which Jamaicans and other Caribbean people crossed in a long wave of well-needed labor force, which moved to Costa Rica and Cuba, Panama to build the railway lines in the late 18th and early 20th century. Dr. Morrison's book is framed by the references to the many previous crossings that have been undertaken by Caribbean people to then focus on more contemporary movements that speak to that inevitable and inescapable truth about the Caribbean experience. The Caribbean undoubtedly is the spawning ground of a large network of movements within the region itself, from inside to places outside of it and even within it. It is a space of restlessness and movement that is little surprising since its vast majority carry the psychological imprint of that huge movement from Africa to the archipelago. That separation and trauma left deep impressions, angst of a necessity to move, to seek, to escape, to resettle. This network of movements has resulted in diasporic communities which have made large contributions to music, science, art, and literature. But I believe that it is literature that Dr. Morrison has studied, that has given us the impressive collection of memories, stories, histories, and exploration which provide a door into the crisscrossing networks of movements. They are narratives of multiculturalism and nation building. They are narratives of the rethinking of history. As writers as early as Alejo Carpentier, a Cuban writer, showed how European migration to an island resulted in migration within that island, migration between Jamaica and that island, migration between that island and Cuba, and back to the island of Sandeman. That was a huge part of the marvelous that was real. Laming, Selvon, and others who followed, such as Cristina Garcia, continued to represent in their own ways the communities created outside of the Caribbean that extended the breadth of the Caribbean through the preservation of cultural and linguistic aspects of their heritage. That is what I'm talking about when I say that they deal with migration from that perspective. So I'm going to stop now to give somebody else a chance to. I don't know what is happening with my camera.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Professor Ramsey. It is so interesting to think about the Caribbean, as you say, as this space of restlessness. You know, if you listen to CNN and some of the North American networks, you might think that all migration was directed towards the USA. But I think that the research and the work that you do reminds us that really, you know, certainly in terms of the Caribbean and Jamaica, that there has been migration in all of these different directions and patterns. But when you speak of that space of restlessness, it reminds me of a friend who said to me recently that with the COVID lockdowns, you know, she just longs to jump on a plane. I can identify. Okay, I'm now going to call on Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown, and just let me introduce her first. She is a former senior lecturer in clinical social work in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work at the UWI-Mona, and taught in that capacity for some 40 years. She was founder and coordinator of the Children's Lobby, Jamaica's first advocacy group for children. She was also founder and coordinator of the UWI Violence Prevention Program, an outreach project of the Social Work Unit in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work for over 2 decades. And she has worked to establish a migration studies unit within that department to further the teaching and research agenda of the department as it relates to the issues of Caribbean migration. Dr. Crawford Brown has researched and documented issues relating to Caribbean migration for over 3 decades. We now all know and use the term barrel children. It was Dr. Crawford Brown who coined this term, and she's recognized globally for her groundbreaking work on this phenomenon. Dr. Crawford Brown, you, as we've just heard, you've been actively researching migration and its impact on Caribbean people for well over a decade. Could you say what are some of the most pressing issues and concerns facing us in the Caribbean in this area?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mosley Wood. I'd like to just acknowledge the presence of my colleagues and to, of course, commend Dr. Morrison for wonderful contribution in the form of this lovely text. I want to just focus on a picture as we speak, and would like to basically suggest that the work that I have done, very often when we do our work in the Caribbean and in the university, we are in little silos. You do humanities or you do sociology, etc. And as we are seeing by the conversation that has gone on thus far, this issue of migration is a multidisciplinary topic. And I think that we can only complement each other and undergird each other's findings when we speak to this issue. To answer your, before I answer your question, as Pauletta Ramsey points out, I just like to highlight the fact that the issue of migration has many dimensions. There are female issues related to females and where our labor market is going. There's sociological research which has shown the importance of mothers. Most of my work, I'd like to look on the slide here, suggests that the presence of mothers and contact with mothers is a very, very important area which affects the sociological and psychological space of the child. And so the work and the literatures, the literature that has come out of this area focuses a lot on the feelings and emotions and socio-cultural and psychological impact that migration has had. And so what and how have I found it relevant? I would like to suggest that this is an area which we all must pay attention to, particularly in the era of COVID. I would like to suggest that the university coalesce and come together around the issue of migration using the beautiful dynamics of literature, of sociology, of psychology, and the various disciplines to create a space, if we are the top 4%, in terms of our tertiary education, we need to create a space where all of us can contribute to what's happening with our peoples. And I'd like to suggest in answering your question that we're going to have to look at sociological and sociocultural problems from the point of view of children. Most of my work and the work I'm doing now is focusing on what children are saying. Actually working on a text that's looking at social problems in the migration space. And the recent conference, I'd like to commend Dr. Morrison for attending that conference where she contributed and spoke about her new book. Basically at that conference, we had a little panel that looked at social problems in the migration space, and we found that issues of parental separation, which are occurring at the southern border in the US with what's happening in South America, what's happening with the Venezuelan refugees moving into Trinidad and Tobago, and the Venezuelan refugees moving into Aruba and Bonaire. These are all new areas that go beyond the barrel child phenomenon. So the book I'm working on is called Beyond the Barrel, which is basically speaking to some of the new issues that are emerging out of the Caribbean experience. In order to know what's happening now, we have to go back and look at the work of Camus Brathwaite, look at the work of Elizabeth Thomas Hope and the scholars from all the disciplines, and then come up with policy prescriptions as to where we, and of course, research agenda that we need to follow. Where do we need to go? And I'd like to suggest, as has occurred here, that we need to look at this issue in a multidimensional way. I'd like to suggest that if we are to look at migration in the way that it needs to be analyzed, we must come to terms with the notion that we have to look at it from the point of view of the macro issues. We have to come to it from the point of view of the mezzo issues, and we have to look at it from the point of view of the micro issues. What do I mean? By macro issues, I'm talking about some of the characters and the individuals in the books and the novels that were written could have been better helped if the Caribbean had come to terms with the impact that migration had. We tended to say, oh, you're lucky, you're so fortunate, your parents gone abroad, etc. And it took years for people to understand that there were children who were sad, who were suffering, who were in pain. For example, the book that I just, children's book that I just did, Precious Leaves Paradise, speaks about the pain that a child feels when mom leaves in the night because she can't face the child. When you land in the country of origin, and in the little book that comes out, the child says, Mommy, why is it that America has air conditioning outside? And so I have found it necessary at the micro level to address issues of children who need to be prepared to go to foreign. Children need to be prepared and their families to know what to do when you land in a country that is very, very strange. And so all of the years we've been talking and writing, etc. And I would like to suggest that the agenda for those of us who are interested in migration must use the blending and the beautiful kaleidoscope of feelings and emotions that come out of those models and turn them into a policy framework which says to the government, if you're doing migration of farm workers, you have to put in orientation programs. You don't let them sign a document that says nobody's responsible for their health. You have to deal with their health needs. You have to deal with migrant farm workers. You have to deal with how do they feel about going into a COVID-laden, COVID-filled country when they don't understand. We didn't even understand fully what COVID was like when we sent our hapless workers into North America. And so a place at UWI that could pull together all of these migration narratives, whether they be sociological, they be coming from the humanities, etc., we must be able to meet the needs of the persons who are migrating. And so the notion of having policies are put in place that protect migrant workers, that protect the children, so that we have teleconferencing services that would allow children and families to be able to talk to each other, policies that would allow for the governments of the territories where they're going to be able to respect us better. I think that the reason that our farm workers, for example, are treated in the way they are has to do with the fact that we get an impression when we send our workers without a coat, with a tracksuit jacket on a plane to a country like Canada at the beginning of fall, without preparing them adequately, suggests that our neighbors to the north, or metropolitan north, those authorities disrespect our people and feel they're not cared for. So you have a big advocacy group there, but my take on it is that we know our people. We know that our people, some of them cannot read, they don't know the technology, how to use the cards. We don't even know how to use the technology so well, and yet we send persons who have a primary school education off. Those are some of the macro issues. Other macro issues that I've addressed with children have to do with a new arrivals program that could better prepare children. Other policies would include mandatory support groups for children and families who are left behind in our schools, in the same way that US schools have mandatory divorce support groups. In their schools, we need support groups for the children who are left behind. The children different from the adolescents, different from the adults. And at the METSA level, I'm suggesting that our community groups provide services in the form of kiosks through, for example, our remittance aid services like our Jamaican Nationals and Grace Kennedys, etc. in the corporate world, where I'm suggesting that we need to provide support services for our migrant workers who and all who migrate, individuals who are in foreign. We need to use this wealth and wealth of experience and the novels, etc., to provide social programs which are very, very easily implementable, so that we can support our persons who are left behind, children included, as well as those who are abroad who constantly yearn for this little place that we call paradise. So I am going to pause here. You all know my findings. The absence of mother and father have created separation in our children, and the separation of those children has made them vulnerable to issues like human trafficking. Those are some new issues occurring in the Caribbean now. Child trafficking and the vulnerabilities that are created are creating new issues beyond the barrel for our people. And so we're finding in Canada, for example, research is showing that more and more Caribbean kids are turning up in the juvenile justice system, in the prison system. We have child lifers who are there for life because they have got caught up in the drug trade. What can we do to staunch this trend that we are finding with our migrants? those are some of the things that we have to address. And if we look at the work that's coming out of your department, out of my department, out of various departments, it's suggesting that we need to pull our minds together with some kind of academic loosely constructed unit that would allow us to all look at this issue and contribute to policy and at the macro level, so that the generations coming will not have to go through the kinds of issues and problems that the previous generations did, from Windrush coming before Windrush and after coming right up. So I'm going to pause there and leave the discussion for others to contribute, because this is so rich and there are so many issues that are coming out. Okay.
Thank you for those words, Claudette. So very interesting and so thought-provoking. And I just want to encourage those of you who are listening online to write your questions in the online chat. If you have questions for any of the panelists or for the author, please go ahead and write those questions, and we'll ensure that they are fed to the panelists and that you get your responses. Claudette, I thought that what you were saying was so compelling and so interesting. And when you spoke about the need to look at issues about migration in this multi-dimensional way, and you referred to novels that allow us this insight into how these issues trickle down and are dealt with at the level of the individual. And I just wanted to, first of all, to ask you if you had ever used literature, novels, or poetry in your own classes to try to broaden students' understanding of the impact of migration and how it is felt at the individual level. And I'd like to also, after you've responded, to also move to Nadi and Paulette to ask them about how literature might be used in this regard and the value of literature in allowing persons to think broadly about issues such as migration. Could you go ahead first, Claudette?
Yes, I'm allowed now. I was allowed by the host. Okay. First of all, I as you heard from my biographical sketch, I spent almost between 15 and 20 years doing outreach programs which involved community members around the university community, some of whose parents had migrated. And yes, my answer is a resounding yes. That I have found that because the Caribbean is like it is, and Paulette, I know, will relate to this, because we are a creative body, a set of people who we have to use music, dance, literature, etc. in our way of life. I found that I was visiting the Netherlands and I do a lot of work, and our department has an MOU with a university in the Netherlands. And I found that the use of music and language was something that I had to keep drawing on in order to teach and in order to help our clients heal. And so if you look at the children's books that I've written, I found that just last week I was working online because the COVID rates went up, and because of my age and whatever, I sought to do teleplay therapy. It's something that I do, and I supervise students. And there was a little boy, he was about 7 years old, and he was asked to see me because he had some emotional and problems as a result of what's happening in Jamaica in terms of crime and violence, etc. But his mommy had left and gone to foreign, and he didn't have anybody to support him. So a grandmother came with him, and the first thing I did was to pick up a book because it was called Suck Finger Jack, something like that. and it was a story about a little boy who sucked his finger. And so I wanted to engage him. And it was the first time we were doing this teleplay therapy. And he immediately took his little pillow, because the US therapists tell you, oh, have the child have a toy and you have a partner toy. When I asked him, could you bring a toy? He said, I don't have any toy, miss. Our children don't have toys. And so the manuals we are given from foreign about what we should do for therapy don't often, what is the word? Don't jibe with what the children's reality is. So I had to go to a storybook with I know as Blackwood mix, right? And use her work. And I started talking to him. Immediately started sucking his finger, and he got his little pillow, and he started listening, and he started going around with the songs, and we did Miss Lou songs and all sorts of different songs. And we started, and we asked him to join in and use the music. The fact is, I do use our work, but we don't have a lot of it for children, because my area is children. So you have these lovely books for adults and the intelligentsia, but we need to be able to have more, because I have all of them that have been produced. I collect them, and those that I have are wonderful ways to get into the world of the child. Because if you're going to do therapy and heal the children and heal the mothers who and adolescents whose mothers have left them, you're going to have to use dance. I use a lot of music. I use puppets, and I have puppets specially made to match the storybooks. And the puppets have hair. When I'm talking about self-image, when they go to foreign and the children have blonde hair and they call them all sorts of names, that hair that the puppet has is hair that is similar to theirs. And the mommy can comb it. We have paper dolls that I use where they can talk about self-image and the hair color and the skin color, etc. And that is what I have had to depend on to be able to do the healing that I need. So I was so pleased when I saw Dr. Morrison's book, the stories, and she was telling me a little bit about the authors, because they had the same experiences generation after generation after generation, and they still do. And we have to find ways to link back and use some of our experiences that are positive in the creative arts in particular to help those children to heal and to help them to understand their identity within the context of the countries they're migrating to.
Thank you.
So that would be my first response.
Thank you, Claudette. I'm going to move on very quickly to Professor Ramsey and Dr. Edwards, who Dr. Edwards spoke of literature as this imaginative history of the Caribbean. Dr. Ramsey spoke about literature connecting us with this great store of memories and stories and histories. And we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm going to ask them each to briefly speak to the idea of how literature can help us get in touch with, explore, know, understand, these issues of migration a little better. And it's probably an unfair question to ask of them, but how can we, alert policymakers, alert academics in other disciplines, perhaps, that literature offers this great value to others who are interested in issues about migration and other issues as well. Paulette, would you like to go first?
Okay. Well, one starting point is to tell them to go buy this book, which I think has so very well pulled together all the different, because she comes to the research from 3 different linguistic areas. Therefore, the 3 different cultural spaces which the writers bring to their work. And she has shown that migration is such a complex crisscrossing of different experiences, different places, different histories, different languages, where people take and leave their language. so that somebody like Patricia in Ecuador is now writing to me in English because many years ago, her grandfather took English to Ecuador. I think, too, the fact that she has done 5 different writers, contemporary writers, that provide us with or this allows her to provide a sort of new perspective, because we have done a lot on the Windrush movement, on the Panama movement, and on several of the older movements. Her focus is on the more contemporary movements of Caribbean people. But as Dr. Crawford just said, it emphasizes that there is so much that is still being replicated, that so much of what is old is still new, is still ongoing, right? I would say that because the islands have been spaces from which people think they must always leave, either to leave and not come back or leave and come back. We can't escape that migration experience, whether people leave as exiles or leave for different reasons, as these people in these authors she has covered. Collectively, her work would reveal for anyone outside of literature, not just the complexities and complications of migration, the whole range of issues that we deal with. Migration and exile, as Dr. Nadi spoke about before. Migration and loss, migration and displacement, migration and longing, migration and ambiguity, migration and the search for identity, migration and contradictions. But that despite their differences and the cultural and linguistic backgrounds, the multiculturality of the Caribbean is highlighted, and the related truth that migration itself and the migration experience is not monolithic. And I think somebody else said it before, but migration is shaped by the various island homes from which people depart and the places to which they go. And let me just go back to the email and say another way in which it connects with new crossings and migration narratives. It shows how these issues remain at the heart of the Caribbean experience. Inescapable experience, inescapable stories of migration, whether they're in older texts or these newer texts, that quest, the understanding of self, and the simultaneous reshaping of self. I want to read something that Dr. Morrison writes in the book that really struck me. She said, "I was struck by each writer's representation of the undeniable singularity of the land of origin and by the tenacity of the sense of cultural and linguistic specificity. At the same time, their fictions highlight the not insignificant challenge of reinventing and holding on to the self as they narrativize a remembered, imagined, refashionized connection to their rocks of origin." Remember at the beginning, I talked about how those 3rd and 4th generations in Costa Rica, Panama, and so on, how they carry so much of those memories that were shared with them about home and the place from which their parents and so on traveled. The book is well written and shows Dr. Morrison's impeccable linguistic versatility. Its broad interdisciplinary approach allows for its remarkable appeal and stellar contribution to the conversation about Caribbean peoples and their crossings to various metropoles for varying reasons, and their unrelenting commitment to success and survival and continuity while never forgetting home. In her words, the writers remind us that some journeys are liberatory, never simply necessary, even when they lead to shifting or hyphenated identities. And this is why everybody in every discipline, every lay person, every student should try to read the book and learn about the migration experience and the centrality of migration to Caribbean literatures, even when the writers are not dealing directly with migration as the subject, they eventually are leading to where it began, how it began.
Thank you, Paulette. Can I turn quickly to Nadi, Dr. Edwards, to come back in?
Okay. I second everything that Paulette and Claudette said in their contributions. I want to make two comments. The first comment is about the relationship between literature and other disciplines and the ways in which literature can augment, and conversely, other disciplines can augment, say, literary scholars' exploration of issues like migration. When I think of a novel like Edwidge Danticat's Breath, Eyes, Memory, I think it is almost a kind of classic example of a kind of sociological and psychological exploration of the strains and tensions which are put on familial relationships as a result of migration. So we see the tension between mother and daughter and various other kinds of tensions exacerbated by the fact of migration, of the mother moving to the United States, like so many Caribbean people, to make a life, to escape the kind of social and economic precariousness of the Caribbean region. And conversely, I think literary scholars can learn from the work of people who have done work on migration, like Elizabeth Thomas Hope, Mary Chamberlain, Claudette Crawford Brown, and others. And it's interesting that when you look at a writer like Erna Brodber, who herself is a social scientist, has written novels which explore the issue of migration. I'm thinking of Mile, for instance, and Louisiana, where the question of migration and the ways in which migration will affect identity crop up in these works. So there's a lot of ground for fruitful intercourse between our respective disciplines. And turning to Anthea Morrison's book, I think that this is one of the intellectual insightful aspects of Morrison's work, in that even though she uses the term migration, the term itself, as deployed throughout her analyses of the five writers and the five writers and their works in this in her study. The term, she doesn't use the term migration in a flattened way. In fact, she uses the term in a way that would seem to more accord with the concept of mobilities, where she disaggregates the concept of migration and pays attention to different kinds of migration, different kinds of journeys, different kinds of mobilities, the ways in which socioeconomic categories will, as well, personal desires and intentions will affect and determine the particular type of migration experience. and the difference between, say, someone who migrates as a result of economic conditions, someone who migrates in order to pursue, say, cultural and intellectual pursuits, and someone who migrates in order to escape maybe particular kinds of emotional and psychological situations. And I think this is one of the useful features of Morrison's book, in the way in which she doesn't flatten the term migration, but she disaggregates it and allows us to see how the various writers depict a range of complex, complicated, and often conflicting experiences and approaches in relation to migration.
Thank you for that comprehensive response, Nadi. Dr. Crawford Brown would like to come back in. I just want to serve notice on Anthea that there have been some questions for her about the writing process. I'm going to go to Dr. Crawford Brown. I'm going to ask her to be brief because it's soon time to wrap up, and then I'll come back to the author. Go ahead, please, Claudette.
Yes, just a quick word to say that what is happening with this session is very exciting, in that it suggests to me that the information is so rich that we may want to be thinking in terms of pedagogy, in terms of looking at new styles of pedagogy, given COVID and the use of Zoom, etc. Like this week, I was asked, because of that international conference, I was asked to do some web conferencing for global learning, to talk to schools in Africa, all over the world, about migration. And I'm thinking that rather than one department or one sociological, psychological perspective, out of this meeting or webinar, could we possibly think about using Carimac or using other methods to get those stories and people's experiences into some format where younger people from the high school pre-UE phase could get to understand more deeply what the migration experiences are. I just want to throw that in as one of the deliverables or outputs of this session, because we have such a rich content in our various departments. Can we find a way somehow of getting it out in a form using the technology that would allow parents and children to understand better? I've been asked already to do an animated version of the children's book, for example. Could we infuse that with something from your department, possibly, so that we could get the richness of our joint experiences into our schools at high school level? This is just a thought that came to me as Paulette and Nadi spoke. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Dr. Mosley Wood.
Thank you, Claudette. Yes, I certainly agree with you that we need to do more of projects and initiatives that allow for input from different departments, different disciplines, and that approach certainly enriches. A collection of stories, and possibly because I'm a film person, I think about a collection of stories, both written and visual stories, film narratives that would help inform us in terms of our consideration of these kinds of issues. So thank you for that suggestion. I'm going to turn now back to the author, Anthea Morrison, the lady of the day, and ask her to respond to some of the questions that have been coming in on the chat. Anthea, persons online are very interested in the writing process. And what they want to know is what was a highlight of writing the book and what was the most difficult part of the writing process?
Wow. The highlight. I would like to be lighthearted and say the highlight was to finish it finally. But more seriously, I think the difficulty was really the rich corpus of text. And I think my colleagues who have spoken so eloquently have highlighted how large the issue was. So my problem was how to delimit it, how to choose. That was, I think, a challenge. I always knew, to be honest, because of a personal bias, that I had to have francophone writers there, because I had done a lot on francophone writers previously. At the same time, I was always concerned about oversimplification, and I pray that you don't find that to be an issue. Because, for instance, you might say that Maryse Condé and Edwidge Danticat are both from the francophone Caribbean, but that is absolutely reductive, because we know Haiti with its remarkable history. We know about Haiti as the first Black republic, and Martinique and Guadeloupe, who are still départements d'outre-mer, overseas departments of France. Those countries are so different, although they share a Creole, which is not that surprisingly different. Then you have Haiti and the Dominican Republic, both inhabiting Hispaniola. But these are countries which have had historical differences, and in the very present era, issues of statehood and issues of national belonging affect Haitians who actually have become Dominicans. So what I'm saying is that oversimplification was something that I worried about. And so I had to keep it to 5 authors. How did I select these authors? Honestly, folks, I remember last year or 2 years ago teaching for the first time a book I love, The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selvon. I could have included Sam Selvon. That is a rich text, and similar to what Nadi was just saying, it's full of sociological insights. I don't know if it was Nadi or Claudette or Paulette. I was very drawn to Austin Clarke's work, not just because of my many years in Barbados, but a novel like The Meeting Point is one of these early novels of migration, or there's Paul Marshall's Brown Girl, Brown Stones. So in the end, I decided I would focus on the 21st century mainly. There's just one exception. The doyenne of the group chronologically is Maryse Condé, the Guadeloupean, who has just celebrated her 83rd, I think. No, it's her 84th birthday. So I included one of her novels, Les Derniers Rois Mages from 1992, but I had a 21st century one. I was hoping, I hope I succeeded, to bring something somewhat new into the discussion. So this was the challenges of the comparative analysis from 3 very different linguistic areas, but even more importantly, from different nations. And I want to say, for instance, that I could have included Aunt Jen. I would have loved to include Aunt Jen by the celebrated Paulette Ramsey, but I had already included another Jamaican, Curdella Forbes. And obviously, if you have 5 authors, you can't have 2 Jamaicans, folks. Huh? I think that's pretty clear. And Curdella Forbes is somebody who has now, by the way, I should mention it, go out and get her prize-winning novel, The Tall History of Sugar. She has a substantial corpus of work. So I don't know if I have answered. I've tried to respond to the question of what was most difficult. And a sense, I think, at the end, if I'm being asked, what might have made me feel sigh of relief? Just the journeying obsession that I realize has been on my mind. When I went to Barbados first to teach in 1986, we used to stop off at several islands. Rachel Mosley Wood is very aware of those days, you know, Antigua, St. Martin, then you came down to Barbados, or if you were going to Trinidad. And although I had graduated from UWI at a time when the campus was more diverse, and I had friends from Trinidad and Barbados in my classes, I think I became much more of a Caribbean person in those Barbados years. My son, for instance, had a Bajan accent. He no longer does. So I guess what I'm saying is that my own sense of the breadth of the Caribbean meant that it would have been difficult for me to, if I'm talking about migration, to just limit it to one language area. I'm not sure I've answered the questions, but I want to stop there. Thank you. And thanks to the really excellent panelists for their insights. Dr. Mosley-Wood, am I off the hook?
Thank you, Anthea. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. And I think it would be most appropriate if we give the author the last word. And we are coming up upon the time when we have to close the event. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all of the questions, but I think that we have addressed most of them. Thank you so much to everyone who participated in this event. Professor Wabinte Wariboko, Dr. Joseph Powell, Dr. Hilary Robertson Hicklin, who gave that excellent review. To the members of the panel, Dr. Norval Edwards, Professor Paulette Ramsey, Dr. Claudette Crawford Brown, to the team at UWI Press. There are a lot of names, and I'm not going to try to call all of them, but to simply express our deep appreciation to UWI Press for the publication of the book, but also for hosting us here on Zoom and for hosting the live stream on YouTube. Thank you so much for your assistance and for collaborating with the Department of Literatures in English and helping us to finally do this book launch. I'd also like to thank members of the department, and there I am sufficiently familiar with the names to call a few. Miss Whitney Eaton, Miss Antoinette Jackson, and Mrs. Denise Gordon-Francis. Thank you so much for your work behind the scenes. And of course, the biggest thank you, it is her book launch, but Anthea, thank you for this wonderful book. So many lovely things have been said about it, and it is such a great contribution to the scholarship on Caribbean literature. Congratulations on this fantastic accomplishment. To all of those who have joined us online, thank you. We really appreciate your being with us this afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.